Greetings viewers, Eric the Car Guy here, back again with another repair video for you. Behind me, my 2001 Honda Odyssey. It has a power steering pump that's been leaking for a little bit, and I thought I'd go through the process of resealing it today. Many of you have written to me about rebuilding these power steering pumps, that type of thing. Well, we're gonna have this one all apart anyway, so you'll get a pretty good idea of what you're in for if you're in for a rebuild on one of these pumps as well. So if you need to rebuild a Honda power steering pump, this is the video for you. Let's get started. I'm going to start by removing this upper engine cover. I'm also going to remove this other cover just for good measure. Now that stuff is removed, I can very easily access my power steering pump. It's really nice of Honda to put this up top for me. Not wanting all the fluid to bleed out, I'm going to use what I've used in many other videos, which is just a couple pieces of fuel line on the end of a pair of vice grips. And I'm going to pinch off this line here. There's no better time to like change your power steering fluid. I plan on doing another video on that, but this one's just going to be about rebuilding this. And there's going to be some drippage, so I'm also going to get another pan to slide it up underneath here. Pair of pliers. It's the hose clamp on this line, loose. Just pull it back, and this is the part where you'll see fluid coming out. I don't really like it on the belts. I'm probably gonna hit it with some brake clean so that it doesn't bleed out of here. I'm gonna remove this upper line because that's where it's actually drawing from now. These are both 10 millimeter, by the way. In fact, the only sockets I believe you're gonna need for this are like 10 and 12 to get the actual power steering pump off of here. And I'm gonna hook this up under here like this. From here, there's two 12 millimeter fasteners. There's one here in the back that's holding it on, but then underneath the pulley in between here, there's another one right on the front. Here's my choice of tools set up for this, because the engine mount's like right in the way when you try to come in here, and it's difficult to access. You have to get just the right length for this to work right. And I'm going to loosen the one in the back. So they're both 12 millimeter. Now that that's loose, right here is the tensioner bolt. So you turn that counterclockwise and the belt will loosen. You might hit this with a little penetrating oil before you get started. That'll make things move easier if they're a little corroded. And we really just want to back it off enough to where the belt's loose enough to slip off of the pulley. And we're fine there. Now that that's loose, I can lift up on the pump a little bit again, and I can gain access to that lower fastener down there. Well, at least I thought I could. Now I took the dipstick tube, or the dipstick out of the tube here, but I'm noticing this fluid is like dripping really close to that. You don't really want power steering fluid in your oil, so try to keep that out of there. The nut. Once you've got all that undone, there's your prize. Now that that's out of the way, I'm going to put my dipstick back in, keep contaminants out of there, and I'm just going to clean the area with a bit of brake clean. And now we'll have some time to dry up and evaporate while we're rebuilding the pump. Meanwhile, over at Eric the Car Guy's bench, we're going to take this apart. Honda made it super easy for us. All we've got to do is take off this 19 millimeter nut on the front of this and we can get the pulley off. With some power steering pumps, you need a special tool in order to remove that front pulley. I also got this seal kit here, which as you can see fits many, many years. I mean, Honda uses this power steering pump a lot. So I think this, if nothing else, this video is going to help a lot of you with these issues. There really isn't much to it. I'm going to start by removing this pulley, and then I'm going to take it over to the parts washer and clean off all the gook and everything off the outside before we start opening it up. Doesn't even require the use of a puller to get this off. And now we have the heart of the power steering pump. This is, in essence, it. I'm going to do my best to keep the cleaner out of the internals of this, because I'm assuming those are going to be quite clean. So I'm going to try to keep my thumb, fingers, whatever, on these as I'm cleaning, just to keep them, you know, any kind of junk out of there. Hey, now we're back at the magic parts washer. As I said, I'm going to try to avoid getting this down inside of things. I just want to clean the outside of the housing. It's pretty now. Well, I suppose now that it's all clean, we can call it rebuilt. Let's put it back on the car. No, not quite. We're going to take off a couple of things. This I believe might be leaking here. This is a 10mm fastener. Let's see. Looks like we do have that one. So we know the kit's at least good for one. Now I'm going to remove the back of the assembly. And these, I believe, are 12s. And I'm right. This will reveal the actual pump mechanism. Ready? Whoa. Ooh, the veins are falling out. It's very important that those pretty much stay in line. Now these have, I believe, two ends. One is rounded and one is flat. If I'm not mistaken, the rounded edge needs to go towards the outside of the pump. Here's the inside of the pump housing itself. This part of the pump rotates inside of here, so as your engine runs, this is rotating, and these little veins here come in contact with the inside of this. And as they do, there's an inlet and an outlet there that moves the fluid through the pump. And this is a precision machine part, which means it must go back together in the same way it came apart. If not, bad things will happen. Anything that we do in here, we want to make sure we keep clean, because especially in this area, any bits of dirt, that type of thing, things that could damage the pump permanently. So we do not want that to happen. Well, so much for keeping those veins together. Not going to happen the way I wanted, but like I said, you want to make sure that they're all pointed with the curved side out. This being another part of the pump, I'm a little concerned about this scoring here. I wonder if it's intentional or not. The tiniest changes in the clearances inside of this thing will cause noise. This is how this goes together in here. There's another O-ring. And another O-ring down inside of here. One of the things that will kill a Honda power steering pump, or Honda power steering system in general, is not using Honda fluid. It's extremely important that you use Honda fluid in a Honda power steering system. This guy's got to come out from the front. I've got my snap ring pliers adjusted now, I hope. Yeah, there we go. And since these lock, we're going to put them far away so that won't go flying off into the universe on us. Yep, that's a bearing. Cool. There's that seal. Now with this bearing, I want to rotate it, see if I feel any roughness or hear any noise while I'm doing that. If there is, I should replace the bearing, because the slightest noise here sounds really flippin' loud when it's on the vehicle. But it sounds pretty quiet to me. And if I were to have to replace this bearing, it looks like maybe put this back in the vise this way and hammer it back through this way, and then hammer this down until it reaches that stopping point with that collar. You might put a socket or something in there, so if the seal started to leak, it would leak in this area into the bearing. Just gonna keep this washer here with this. Just keep all my parts in order. Ow, my face. Another O-ring there. We've got other pieces, parts. And there is the valve. As you're driving down the highway, you're not going to need the power steering system, but you'll need it when you're trying to pull into a parking space. So this helps redirect pressure and not rob power from the engine with running the power steering pump while you're driving down the highway. I believe as there's more resistance placed against it, it causes the valve to open up, but as it's cruising down the highway, then it doesn't need that. But there, so you can get a look down inside. Ooh, success. See if this will come out now. Yep. Not sure if we really needed to take this out, but I was curious about what was behind it. So I think we've taken this down as far as we can, although I'm not really sure we needed to take this part out. So I suppose it's time to go through the process of reinstalling the seals, making sure everything's clean, and putting it all back together. Why don't we start with this main seal here. I am going to use a bit of assembly lube for transmissions and putting this in here. This stuff is used when you're rebuilding, like say, an automatic transmission. It's really good to put on seals and such. I'm gonna start by removing the old seal. You might be asking yourself, Eric, don't you have a seal remover or something? Well, I'm gonna call this or something. I wonder if I can, no, it's not gonna come in from the back there. I'm just gonna see if I can pry this out. And I can. Just to be on the safe side, I'll match up with the new one, and it does. Now, cleaning this out with a rag like this, I'm gonna be honest, it's not the best option because you leave little pieces of lint down in there. That's not really what I'm looking to do. Feel free to yell at me for this. I'm gonna go find a socket that's about this big so that I can use it to place this down in here. Found one. This 21mm socket fits on this so stinking perfectly. It's like they were made for each other. There's one more thing I'm gonna get. I'm gonna get a little bit of power steering fluid because as I put this back together, I'm gonna be restoring some of the power steering fluid, but I'm gonna make it so that it doesn't start up dry because I don't want that. I want it to have good fluid going through it when I first start the engine. Now, maybe saying to yourself, Eric, why don't you use the assembly lube on the outside? Well, because I want it to sort of stay in place. So instead of assembly lube, I'm just going to put a bit of power steering fluid on it. This is what it's exposed to anyway. And I want to make sure the lip's in there correctly. And I'm going to lubricate the inside of this after I get it installed. I'm going to take the socket, my hammer it down into place. That looks like it's down in there just about perfect. Now I'm going to take some of that trans assembly lube that we talked about and just put it on the inside of that seal. That way the seal's not starting up dry. And this whole area is going to be dry in here. This is where the bearing lives. So I don't need to worry about dirt and debris as much here as I do in other places. But I'm still going to be mindful of it because I don't want dirt and debris inside my power steering pump. It's just that simple. Let's get this shaft back into place, and because that seal rides on this shaft, I'm also going to add a little bit of assembly lube there. I'm going to get a slightly larger socket for this because I don't want to hit on the inside of this bearing. I want to try to hit around the outside of this bearing. So I want to try to find something that's going to make contact with the outer edge of this. Don't forget the washer that goes on the back of the shaft before it goes back together. I found a 1 1/16 socket. It seems to fit this perfectly. It's a Sonnet socket. And I'm just going to tap it in far enough to where it goes just down past where that snap ring was. You can see it slowly going in. A little farther. If I can, I want to try to locate it in a slightly different spot than that worn area I showed you on the shaft earlier. That will make it so the seal can maybe seal a little bit better. It still spins, and that's an awesome sign. Like I said, if this bearing's noisy, you got to replace it. And you're going to have to knock it off the shaft, similar to what I showed here, and put the new one on. And the bearing number is written right there on the outside of the seal. Make sure it rotates. It's a little stiff, but that's okay. Kind of expect that with new seals. And now we'll start rebuilding from the back side. I have one O-ring, a little bit of a disassembly lube, just a little. Fits down inside the ridge there. Next up, we have these pieces of the pump. Before we go further, there is another O-ring. When you rebuild automatic transmissions, it's similar to this in that you have to replace a lot of O-rings. And you always want to match everything up to make sure that it's the same thickness, made out of the same materials. Oh, good. So that's good. See if that fits down in there. Fits down in there perfectly. And this, at this point, I'm using a little bit of power steering fluid that's sort of left over. I could use a trans-assembly lube too, I suppose. I don't think this sits down there in any particular orientation. I think as long as it's down in there, it's good. But it needs to fit all the way down in there and lock into place. And now, if you remember, there was the vane part of our pump, which I messed up all the vanes by doing what I did. Make sure there's no dirt or debris. I get that guy back down on there. And now we will very carefully take our vanes. And my bench was clean before I got started, and put them back in. Remember, rounded side out. But this side on the bottom here is squared off, and the top is rounded a little bit. This assembly lube will help keep everything in place when I put this back together. Right, well, moments ago, we were putting it together or assembling the pump, and I was a little confused on how things were lining up on the pump. I wanted to make sure I had it correct. It looks like we're good to go because there's, as you can see, a couple of slots on the outside of this part of the pump assembly. Those slots will line up with these pegs, and one of them is a larger one and one of them is a smaller one. So it should only go together one way. You know, you can almost imperceptibly see the difference in sizes of those. So I wanted to make sure that I had that on there correctly. And the way I did that was I took everything out and just left those slots there just to see so that it would fit down on there flush. Because otherwise, it didn't quite want to go back together like I wanted it to. So, in fact, I don't think, yeah. If you try to put it together this way, completely the opposite, it doesn't want to go together. But if you flip it around 180 degrees, it goes together fine. So it only goes together in one direction. So if you're having difficulty during reassembly, know that one of these is larger than the other, and it's designed so that it only goes back together one way. So I'm going to go back to, and this is the other part of the pump assembly that came out, and I laid it out the way it came in. So I took it out and I laid it down. There's a little machined dot that's right up there in the top by my finger, and that side faces out towards the back of the housing. The opposite side does not have that dot. And also you'll notice that one of these holes is sort of elongated, and this one is just a straight hole. The large end goes into the cylindrical hole, the small one goes into the slotted one, like that. You try to do it the other way, it won't go together. So they were very smart in machining these things in such a way to where they only reassembled in one direction. For now, I'm going to continue to replace these vanes. You can also sort of see witness marks on the inside of these from where they would wear a little bit. That discoloration there. The dark side faces in. Like I said, this outer edge is somewhat rounded. All the vanes are back in place. Now I'm just going to line this up to make sure that everything is in place again. Still in place. Okay, that goes together perfectly. Remember, the dot faces out. And I'm going to try to see these slots down inside here. I'm going to try to line these up with those slots. It'll eventually fall into place when I go to do final assembly. And last but not least is this outer assembly. The outer part has arrows on it. The inner part shows the wear from in here. It's still got the same slotted hole and big hole, slotted hole, big hole. And so I'm going to line those up. Now we have this weird O-ring to replace, which kind of gotten flattened out like a pancake. Looks a little weird up in this area, but I'm hoping that as I put it together, it's going to push these out. Small one goes in the slot, big one goes up in the top here. And you don't want to start running this down, because if you do and you break something, you're buying yourself a new pump and you just wasted a bunch of time. It might just be the edge of that O-ring catching on there. So I'm going to put that O-ring on like that. See if that helps. Yeah, I think the rest of that is just O-ring. Before I do this and fully commit, I'm going to pour a little power steering fluid down inside the pump. This way, I'm not starting the pump up dry. You never want to do this with oil pumps. You usually pack them with grease or something. In this case, I'm going to use a little bit of power steering fluid. A lot of it's probably going to come running right out. In case you're wondering, these are supposed to get tightened to 20 Newton meters. I'm going to run them down with the impact for now, lightly. I could torque them later. Looks like it's sealing pretty good. It's just going to be that O-ring that's getting kind of weird on me. There were no seals or anything up in here. I'm now going to put the sub valve in, and you can see in the manual it shows this little roll pin here has to go in that hole right down there on the right. Really, honestly, didn't need to take this out, but I was curious. You ever get curious and just take stuff apart anyway? So somewhere, there it is. I just gave it a slight twist, it slid home. That has, if you remember, this small snap ring. And it just clipped right in. That was an easy one. This is the flow control valve. I'm going to reinstall it. This smaller end fits up inside the housing and the larger end faces you. You can just sort of drop down into place, followed by the spring. And then we've got another O-ring. Just by my eyeballs, it looks like that one. About the same size and thickness. There's already a little bit of power steering fluid on here. This, if you care, gets tightened to 49 Newton meters or 36 foot-pounds. So that really just leaves us with this outer one. I wonder where those two other O-rings went. I bet you this one's for the line coming into the power steering pump. Bet you what that one's for. And this one went on there, like so. I don't think there's anything else other than tightening this down. And you may disagree with me for doing this, but I'm doing it. All that's left is to put this front pulley back on. I'm going to install it back on the vehicle. And then before I put the power steering line in, I'm going to dump fluid in there until it comes out. This is not a left-handed thread. It is a 19 millimeter. Let's get this back on the van. All right, everything's all dried up down here now from during the process of the rebuild. But we had an O-ring for this power steering line. I think they gave us two because there may be two different sizes here, but I'm also going to replace this. Here's my new one, and there were two different sizes. And as I said, I think that they'd have two different size inlets for this. There, new O-ring. Now this is the tricky one. This one goes on the lower. That's the one that fits the nut here. So I try to thread that through first. Once you've got that done, you're pretty much home free. The other one's easy to get to. And the back of it is squared off, so it only fits in there one way. This is honestly kind of a pain. It's like a little O-ring on there. It's supposed to hold it in place for you. Part's a little fiddly, but once you're past it, yeah, everything else is pretty easy. And get the bolt for the back. I'm just going to thread these down finger tight. And with this one, I'm going to do it with my socket. All right, make sure it's still on the pulley underneath. Back on there. Now, I would highly recommend that when you set the tension like I'm doing now, you do it with a hand ratchet and not with some air tool. This pump was a little bit noisy before. We're going to see if it is after I'm done. And the spec for this is they want 13 millimeters of belt deflection. So if you have a belt deflection gauge, I do not, 13 millimeters is the number you're looking for. And also know that you may think you got it tight with a tension set like this, but as soon as you go to tighten this fastener and this fastener down, it's going to tighten up even more. So leave it a little bit loose before you do your final fastening. But one of the things that's going to kill that front bearing is over tightening this belt. So to avoid that, belt deflection, like I said, about 13 millimeters. So it's about that. Or half an inch. You can call it that too. We don't want the belt to be noisy, but at the same time, we don't want it so tight we kill that bearing. Now for a little power steering fluid down into here. Well, actually, let's reattach this hose. I try to get the clamp right back in the same spot on the hose. This will help ensure a good seal. Remember, I don't want stuff getting into my oil. And I'm just going to keep pouring in until I see it, whoop, a little bit too far. Let's move our tools and clean that up with some brake clean. All right, before I start it up, I know I lost a little bit of fluid. I'm going to top it off. And I'm going to run it, let it stabilize, and then I'm going to turn the steering wheel lock to lock a couple of times to make sure I'm working out all the air. And then I'm going to recheck again and make sure everything's all topped up. And if it is, well, we got ourselves a reconditioned power steering pump. Moment of truth. I'm going to start it up, see if it still works. It's a little bit noisy to start with, but that's almost to be expected. Some air in the system, as you can see. It's a little bubbly down in there, sort of like chocolate milk. It's going to take a little bit for that air to get out. but when it does, things should be better. Should quiet down a bit. I'm going to turn the wheel lock to lock. Gonna give it some time. And then I'm gonna shut it off and let it sit. Let some of that air work itself out. And then we'll come back. A lot of air going through there. So I'm gonna let it sit and let that air work its way out of the system. All right, now that we've let it sit for a little while and the air has dissipated, I'm gonna start it up and, well, hope there's no more air and it works well. I did say hope, right? Looks like some more air is being introduced. Yeah, it's got a little bit of air in it. Good thing I put that pan under there, huh? I'm done. I got nothing. All right, well, this job is beating me up. I have had this pump on and off this thing, well, at least 4 times since the last time you saw it, and I'm still unable to find an answer as to why it continues to make noise. Scratch that. I do have a cause, or what I believe is the cause of the problem, and what I believe is happening is that the pump is sucking in air, which in turn makes the pump make noise. Now, there's a couple of places this can happen that I'm going to show you over on the bench, but I believe that the issue involves this O-ring. Now, there's also a TSB on this problem about a different O-ring that I'll also show you here in a minute when it's over on the bench. I'm going to try this one last time, and I'm going to torque everything down the way it's supposed to be torqued, use a Honda O-ring here, and if it doesn't work this time, I'm just going to replace the pump. So if nothing else, I'm hoping this video is a cautionary tale for you. This should work. I'm a little frustrated that it's not working, but stuff happens, I guess. But I've tried, and I'm trying to walk away with a solution for you, or an easy solution. This O-ring kit that I got that had all the O-rings in it was about $16. I was hoping that would be an easy fix for you if you had these. There's a lot of these power steering pumps. It's not just this Odyssey. They're all over Accords and everything, all the way from the 90s up through the 2000s. So we got a lot of these power steering pumps out there. So I'm going to get this off. We'll go over the bench. We'll talk a little bit about what I'm running into, and hopefully I'll have this fixed. I have the power steering pump off. As you can see, I have a second power steering pump sitting here that I had actually in my parts pile over in the other place. This one, however, I don't know if you can hear that, but it has a bad bearing. But I've swapped out parts from the inside of this one to this one. And as I said, there's a TSB on the O-ring that goes right here for power steering pump noise, because it can allow air to be drawn in. This is the suction side of the system. So this is the pressure side, and this is the suction side. So if there's any air that can get in here, it aerates the fluid, and when it does that, that's what's causing the noise. I'm not saying that's what's always causing the noise, but Honda went so far as to make a TSB about that. Now, what I've been struggling with is the seal right around here. And this can also draw in air in the same way. So in fact, this is where the inlet comes in. So it comes in the top right here. And if this was in place, there's the O-ring that I'm about to replace, where that fluid comes into the pump. My hope is that I've just got some issue around here that's just not sealing quite right. And I don't know if it has anything to do with the aftermarket O-ring that I used or what, but here's the new one here. One last thing I'll throw out there. This is the pressure relief valve. And the test for this, as shown in the book, was that you put a hose on the top of this, stick it, submerge it down inside some fluid, and put 14 psi of air, 14 or 15 psi of air. And if you see bubbles coming out, that means this is bad. This is also not bad. I actually took the valve out of this pump and swapped it into this pump. I put this old pump on first just to hear if there was going to be any noise, and there was no whining or power steering noise, but you could really hear that bearing and it sounded quite bad. So I've done a lot. I've really been trying to make this work, and it seems, you know, like the solution is right in front of me. And this time I'm also going to actually torque these down. I believe it was 14 foot-pounds that these got. So I'm going to torque this to spec and do everything I possibly can to try to make this work. In fact, I may even go so far as to use this cover. I'm going to inspect them both and see which one looks better. All right. Now this is the part up in here that I have that's a primary concern. Because as I said, there's where the inlet is coming in. So if there's any leaks up around this area, it's the same if there's a leak up here on the pump. I don't really see anything that looks like any scoring or something that's going to cause that leak. And now I have this new O-ring. This is the other O-ring that I had. As you can see, I've got a very small little bit there that got pinched. And I was thinking, well, maybe that's not sealing. And everything I read says that the smallest, tiniest leak in this is going to allow air to come in. And if any air comes in, that's what's going to create the noise. So that's what we're fighting here. Looking at these, I'm going to go with the one that came with this pump. And I'm just going to go there. And just an FYI, this is the actual power steering pump. All this stuff is just for the drive, but this is the actual pump here. And it's a vane style pump, and as this rotates, it brings in fluid here, compresses it, and throws it out the other side, which would be this side. These would be the outlets here. And that's why this pump has to be positioned in just the right way so that everything flows through it correctly. I've also found, as far as these O-rings go, I was having some trouble getting this one located. If I just put it in here and tried to set it down, it would sort of come out. That's how I damaged that O-ring. I found that if the pump is completely installed, as it is here, when you lay this O-ring down, you have a much higher chance of success. So this way, I could lay it down like this, but I'm actually going to put it down into this groove here. But that seems, actually this fits a little bit better. The other one didn't quite fit up in this area here. In fact, I'll show that to you now. When this one was installed, look how that one fits. See how it's got the gap there? And that's what I was fighting against. So with this O-ring, this is an actual Honda O-ring. This fit is perfect. A little tricky trying to get these dowels lined up with the pump and everything. But once they're in there, you can rotate the whole assembly and get it to go together like you want. I'm just going to run this down with my impact, but I'm going to torque each one of these to the 14 foot-pounds that it calls for. There it is. Got my fingers crossed. Let's put it back in the vehicle. We'll check back in, find out if it's quiet. We've got the power steering pump back on the car. Everything is connected. If this doesn't work, I've got one more thing I'll try, but I got my fingers crossed, as I've said several times so far. Well, we still have a bit of noise, but I have a theory. Come here. I wonder if this hose clamp is not doing so good. It would be the same thing if this O-ring was leaking. So I'm going to put a different hose clamp on here. It's already starting to clear up a little bit. I'm going to put a different hose clamp on here and see if that'll take care of the rest of it. Got to be careful on how this is positioned. I don't want it to come in contact with the belt. If I had it over here, it could possibly hit the belt. Maybe that will take it the rest of the way. We have the new clamp installed. The air has dissipated. I'm going to start it up, try it again. At this point, I'm just going to replace the pump. I wanted to see if I could repair this one, but I can't see what else I could do at this point. All the seals and O-rings are new. The one in the back is Honda. I've torqued the things to spec. There's not much else I can do here aside from replace it. Okay, well, I have certainly been through it with this project. I have had this power steering pump on and off this thing at least 10 times. Trying different things, different O-rings, different configurations, just different ways of putting it together. And so far, come up no dice until now. Check it out. Well, as you can see, or should I say hear, the power steering pump is quiet now. What did I do? Well, this is the pump that I tried to rebuild and do several different things to try to get it to be quiet. It is no longer on the vehicle. What I ended up doing was purchasing a used one off of eBay. It was about $40 and installed that, and that's what cured the problem. I believe they also have remanufactured ones available. They run somewhere in the neighborhood of $140 to $170 that you can buy. This pump was used on a lot of different vehicles besides this Odyssey, a lot of Honda Accords. There are a lot of these out there, so they should be easy to find and not that expensive if you want to go that route. That rebuild kit was about $16 or so you can decide what you want to do. I chased my tail for quite a while trying to fix this. It didn't end up working. I put that power steering pump on, I'm done. So you can decide how you want to use the information in this video. If nothing else, you know what's inside, you know what to expect when you get in here. So you have that. Anyway, if you have automotive questions not covered in this video, I would ask that you head over to EricTheCarGuy.com. There's a welcome video there to tell you about all the amazing features we have there to help you with automotive issues, should you have them. If you wish to connect with me socially, I can be found on Google+, Facebook, and Twitter. I post repair videos every Friday, and I close each of my videos with, be safe, have fun, stay dirty.